This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca and Tara, and today is book chat number 15. Yay.
Yay.
I know. I mean, I feel like I've said so many times before, like, oh, someday it'll be book chat number 209 or something, but
Can you
we're
imagine?
we're at 15. Yeah.
Even 15 is a lot because we've been doing them monthly, right? So that's over a year of book chat.
Yeah, we have. I think we have pretty consistently been doing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we've had a weird wonky week. I'll say this and see if you agree with it.
Okay.
We've had a weird wonky week because we've had some bizarre weather. We had like 60 degree. Well, I don't know. Okay. I'm going to say it in Fahrenheit because that's all I know. You can always jump in with Celsius, but
Yeah.
we had like 60 degrees, which was like a spring day, which nobody wants to see in February in the Midwest here. And then today we had like 3 inches of snow.
Yeah.
So
Us too.
go figure.
It's weird. It's February, but not the right kind of February.
I
You
know,
know?
because you know what it does? It just upsets me when I think about climate change because this is not the way it is supposed to be. So,
Yeah.
well, and it's funny too because people here always complain about cold weather, but now, interestingly, they will say like, "Oh, it was nice weather, but we shouldn't be having it." So
Yeah.
even the people who don't like cold weather are also feeling the pain of this change, right?
Yeah. It's not right.
Yeah. So, what are you currently reading? Do you want to mention what you're currently
Sure.
reading?
So my current fiction read it's an older book from 2011. I'm going to show Rebecca because we're doing this by video, like a video chat. So I'm going to show you the pretty
Ooh.
cover, and it's called The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. And the cover is like this beautiful turquoise, which is one of my favorite colors, and the gold helmet. It's really pretty. And it is, she is the author of Circe, which came out a few years ago, which I loved. So then I picked this one up last spring when my husband and I went to New York. We went to Corning, New York, and they had a really cute little bookstore downtown there called Card Carrying Books, I believe. And so I picked it
Oh.
up there. Yeah, it was really cute little store. And it is a retelling of Achilles and the Trojan War, but from the point of view of his best friend Patroclus. And it is really, really good. I am like devouring it. Every time I get a chance, like 2 minutes of reading, I'm just like flipping through it. So good.
But this is what this comes into one of your, I think, I don't know if it's a favorite kind of genre, but like mythology, right? Would you say that's a pretty high on your list
Yeah,
of books that you like?
I
Yeah.
like anything mythology. And especially when it's got like a feminist slant, which this one does, even though it's the two main characters are males, it still has this feminist slant. And I dig that.
I have a book to talk about today that
Mm,
has that a little bit in it, so you might actually like what I'll talk about a little bit
yes,
later.
I think I will. Can you tell
Yeah.
me what you're reading currently?
I can't. I can't tell you what I'm reading currently because it is part of a series, and I'm going to talk about book 1 today
Okay.
and really promote it. And then I am reading book 2 because I don't want to say anything more because then you'll guess what
Yes.
it is. So I want you to be surprised.
Save it. I like a
I
surprise.
will save that. Yeah.
Okay.
So, do you want to then and I will say this, everybody, Tara and I talked beforehand and a couple things. One, we had nothing really going on in our lives that we wanted to
No.
banter about. So we jumped right into what are we currently reading? And then the second thing is because I know I will probably reference it, but we recorded a podcast last week that will actually will not be posted until the end of February. So you may hear us in that podcast reference books that we talk about today. So it's a little bit out of sequence, but that's how we wanted to do it. So that's what we did, right? Okay.
We do what we want. We
Yeah,
answer to
we
no
are
one.
bad. We're badass bitches. We do what we
Badass
want.
bitches. Don't tell me what I can read or not read.
Yeah, in order or not in order.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, all right.
But I will
So,
never read a series out of order. Hell no. No.
have you ever done that, by the way?
No.
Okay, I
No,
did it
I don't
once
think so.
I did it once accidentally, and it was hilarious because it was a series, and I cannot remember. It's I think it's called the Russ Van Alstyne Mysteries, but I can't remember the female's name. But it was this series of books, and she was an Episcopal priest, and he was a cop. And anyway, they meet, blah, blah, blah. He's married, blah, blah, blah. And I read one of them out of order, and some major thing happened in like book
Oh.
3. And I'm reading book 4, and I'm going, well, what the hell? What happened? So I tell my sister turned me on to the series, and I said, what the hell happened with this? And she went, don't you remember when XYZ happened? And I went, I'm sorry, what? And it happened at the end of book 3, and it was a
Oh,
big cliffhanger thing. So I was so
yeah.
traumatized by reading it out of order that I will never forget that is what I did the only time in my life I've read something out of order.
Yeah,
Crazy.
I know.
Okay. All right. So,
Okay.
so what do you want to talk about first?
Okay, let's go with okay, Who's Afraid of Gender? So it's a nonfiction book by Judith Butler. It's not published yet, so I got it as a ARC advanced reader copy from NetGalley. So
Oh.
Judith Butler is an American philosopher and gender studies scholar. Who's Afraid of Gender is her latest book, so which will be published March 13th, 2024. And it is essentially Judith Butler's take on how the fear of gender is fueling reactionary politics
Oh.
worldwide.
Oh
Yes.
yeah.
So it is very academic. It is a very academic book, but
Mhm.
very interesting. I found mostly it just filled the gaps in my knowledge of not gender theory is not the right word, but that's what term I'm going to use. Just
Mhm.
it filled gaps where I didn't have full information. So, but then also it just also blew everything up in terms of the history of this anti-gender rhetoric that's going on and its connection to the Vatican,
Oh.
evangelical Christianity, right-wing politics, turfs, like the whole
Yeah.
blows it all up, and it's, really deep dives into it.
So is this all from you having read this book? Does it go back in history, or is it a fairly new thing on the scene in terms of
It goes back further. Like, I thought it was fairly new, but it goes
Mhm.
back several decades,
Yeah, I wondered about
which
that, yeah.
yeah, which I didn't realize. Like, I thought it was not really knowing. You kind of just started hearing about it a few years ago, right? But it's really the seeds for it were all planted several decades ago, often by the Vatican. Oh, you know, not to
That's
yeah, it's
interesting.
mhm. Mhm.
How many pages is it? I'm just curious. Is it like a big, thick academic kinda book
I
or
don't
no?
know. So I read a digital copy of it, and
Mhm.
I would say no, it's not really thick. It's maybe about 250 to 300,
Oh, yeah, okay.
which is
Yeah.
not bad actually. Which
Yeah.
for an academic one, I think if it had been any longer, then I might have been like found it to
Mhm.
be a bit of a slog. And it was at times very dry, academic, right? And sometimes I'd be like, I don't know what that word means, blah. But you just keep reading or you Google it, I look up in the dictionary kind of thing. So, but it was very good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
That's
Yeah, it
interesting,
didn't.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm more informed. Do I feel better about the attack on gender that's going on? No. If
Yeah.
anything, I think I'm more fearful for what's going on in the world. But
Alright, we'll have to talk offline at some point because I want you to tell me more about the Vatican link because that's really
hmm
fascinating. That is
hmm
really I tell you,
yeah, I know.
let's face it, most of what's well, I'm not gonna say that, but you know what I'm saying.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
we're doing. We got a little vibes thing going. I'm like, yep, I know.
Especially now that we can see each other, we're like,
Yes,
"Yeah,
you were
we
like,
get it.
yeah.
Yeah, we get it." Okay. Alright. Well, the first book I wanna talk about, and I am going to talk about this for, like I'm not gonna say time me because I know I'll go over 30 seconds, but I want to just mention 15,000 Pieces
Mm.
by Gina Leola Woolsey, who Tara actually read the book, and on our book chat number 13, she gave a great review of it. So you can always go back. That was on December 12th. You can go back and listen to that and hear more detail from Tara. And then also on January 29th, she did an interview with Gina, which was a fabulous interview. It was so fascinating. And that was just obviously very recently. But I do want to just mention a couple things. And you may have said this, but I read the book obviously after that,
Yeah.
both of those podcasts. But just a couple things I want to mention about it, which one is it's fantastic creative nonfiction. And what I mean by that, I'm not really sure what the world means by that, but here's what I think of as creative nonfiction, which is that it is really well researched. A lot of people are interviewed in the process, and it's almost as if you are a a fly on the wall in many different places and can be right there in the moment that all these things are happening. Whether it's a thing that is happening or a conversation between two people, you just feel more like you are absolutely there in the middle of it and getting almost like both sides of it or many sides of whatever it is. And I think Gina did a spectacular job in researching and interviewing so many people. It took her about 10 years to write the book over time. And I just thought that was amazing. And it's a quick read. It's really accessible. I think it's fascinating and highly recommend. But I will say one thing, that the main character, Dr. John Butt, was not always a good person. Like,
Mhm.
I had a lot of issues with him. Like, I
Yeah.
was sometimes getting really angry or feeling frustrated or feeling like I want to punch this guy. I did actually get kind of irritated on a number of occasions, but hey, who doesn't love a flawed character, right? So
Yeah.
that's what makes the book really fascinating, is
Yeah.
that people do not hesitate. The people she interviewed do not hesitate to call him to task publicly and say things about him that are kind of shocking.
Yeah.
But here's my number one big thing about the book that I would say. I want to know, I want a book from his ex-wife,
Mm.
because it was like, and it had to be because it's the nature of the thing, but their marriage and her experience was not really talked about at all. And I am so fascinated. Like, I want to hear her side of everything. And of course that will never happen, and that's
Yeah.
okay. But I like to just picture this woman reading that book going, what the fuck? You
Yeah.
know?
I did.
I
Yeah.
think I
Yeah.
think she probably did. So
Yeah.
anyway, highly recommend, along with Tara, 15,000 Pieces by Gina Leola Woolsey.
Yeah. Great book. Great book. Okay. I'm going to continue, not with the same theme, but kind of a theme in that our books are very kind of serious, like dark, deep books. I feel like we're getting some deep books here. I'm going to continue.
It's winter. I think that's
It's
what we get
winter.
in the
Maybe
winter,
that's
maybe?
it. Maybe
I don't
that's
know.
it. I can't remember what my third book is. Oh, okay. Yep, yep, yep. But my second book, that's what I'm talking about now. I'm going to stop jumping ahead. My second book is Love and Rain by Carmela Circelli. So, the setup, it's a novel that explores the nature of love, its often accompanying pain, and the near impossibility of its enduring happiness. So, that's the overall arc of it. But it moves in space and time from near present day Toronto to Montreal, then Rome in the 60s and 70s, following the life stories of an immigrant Italian family, a family that left Italy decades before to move to Canada, and then actually ends up several of its members moving back to Italy, which I found really interesting too. It also traces the individual rebellion and social revolution that marked the FLQ. Now, forgive my French pronunciation here because I'm terrible, but FLQ is the Front de Liberation du Quebec in Quebec and the Red Brigades in Italy in the late 1970s. So I really enjoyed this book way more than I thought it would. I was in when it was Halle Gaudry from River Street Writes that again recommended this book. I was intrigued because of the FLQ movement, which I know about, but I don't know a lot. I was like a baby when it all happened. So I'm like I kind of intrigued, but I wasn't sure how much I was afraid it was going to be one of those like a literary book that keeps you at a distance. but
Mhm.
it's not a very it's a very, like, I found myself, like, drawn into this story of this family that I can't remember the main character's name at the beginning, but you get her story first and what's going on with her, and she's out of sorts and stuff. And then you're thrown back into the story of the 60s and 70s, which helps explain her present situation in present day Toronto. I don't know if I've
Oh.
explained that really well, but it was like, I really enjoyed it. I'm going to look at a couple of my notes here. Oh yeah, so like I enjoyed the having the FLQ events kind of reflected in this brigade movement in Italy. You got to follow the characters from beginning to end, even secondary characters, which I really like knowing sometimes these characters that just pop in. I like
Mhm.
knowing what happens in their lives. So you get that because some of the characters that you meet at the beginning who are older, you then get to see them as youth in
Oh, I
Italy,
like
which
that.
I know I really like that.
Uh-huh.
There were musical references throughout because it's also like an ode to music. And this was
Oh.
I just before I kind of clued into the musical references, was reading it. I'm like, kind of feel like I'm reading a Leonard Cohen book. Like I felt like I had that kind of feeling of when I was a university student and started reading Leonard Cohen. I'm like, I feel like I'm reading Leonard Cohen. But then I started looking at the titles. It's not chapters; it's more sections. The titles are actually song titles, either by there is Leonard Cohen. Oh, I wrote my books downstairs. Joni Mitchell is referenced there. I think was it the Beatles? I don't think it was the Beatles, but another group from the 60s. So I loved that. And then music was just carried throughout the book, even for the characters and stuff. So I thought that was really cool because I love little hidden references. I don't always
Yeah.
figure them out, but when I do, I'm like, oh, look at me figuring out the reference. So I love that. And then there's also natural elements. So, like the trees, the wind, the sea that are carried throughout the book, kind of like in the background, and then they would push their way forward. So, I really like that. There's a lot to
Wow.
this book. There's a lot in the book.
Now, let me ask you, is FLQ, is that during the time when, like, Quebec wanted to secede from Canada? Is that what that whole
Yes. Yeah.
thing is
When they
about? Yeah,
wanted
okay.
to, the FLQ was considered a terrorist group by the government.
Wow.
Yes. Yes. And they wanted to create an independent and socialist Quebec. And they went through that they tried to get to that through violent means of
Oh, okay.
kidnapping and even involved
Oh, that's
murder,
right.
killing a politician. Yes.
That's right. I do remember reading about that. And that not that long ago, within the last few years, I remember reading
Yeah.
up on that. Wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And then when the characters, so this family, members of the family who moved from Italy to Montreal to get away kind of from the poverty that they had in Italy, and then they moved to Montreal, and then the FLQ happens a couple decades later. So some of them actually went back to Italy, but then there was another, the brigade movement that was going on, and with protests and shootings and stuff happening there at universities and against the fascist government and stuff like this.
So is the person who wrote the book, is she like is it Quebecer? Is that how you say it, I think? Or
I don't
Quebecois?
think she is. I think,
I'm just curious, like, what made her that's a really
yeah,
interesting parallel between that movement and the Italian
yeah.
movement. Like, what drew her to that?
Let
It's
me
interesting.
see. Because I know she is actually a registered psychotherapist, because that also plays, there's a theme of that as well in the book,
Oh.
psychotherapy. But she is at the moment, she lives in Toronto, went to school in Toronto. Oh, wait, now I'm looking at another Writers Union of Canada. Born in southern Italy and grew up in Montreal and
Oh,
moved to
fascinating.
Toronto in 1976 to study philosophy. So there's the link.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so she's got all that connection to the
Yeah.
story. Well, that's really that sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and I did look at that one, and I at the time, I just thought, "Oh, I don't know anything about both movements too much." So that's why I
Mm,
kinda passed on that one, but that does sound pretty interesting.
yeah. It was very good. Yep.
Job, good review. I like that.
Oh, thank you. I felt like I was all over the place, but there's a lot going on in this book. It was difficult to kind of just keep it very succinct. So,
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about. Oh, and I have. Oh, but see, I can't even show it to you because the cover. I got 2 books.
hmm
And because they came through my library system statewide in Michigan, they put the stinking label to check out, like right on the front of the book. So it
oh,
covers up and you can't peel it off and they tell you not to peel it off. And one day I did peel it off and then I couldn't stick it back on. It was horrible. So I'm not going to touch it. Anyway, can't even show you the cover, but I have Amelia and Me by
mm,
Heather Stemp,
yep.
who is the mother-in-law of one of our good friends, Jen Bookfiend. And it was so funny because Jen told me her mother-in-law is publishing the 3rd book in the Ginny Ross series and asked if I was interested in reading it. And I said, yeah, because it's a juvenile book, juvenile historical fiction about Amelia Earhart as a sort of tangential character. But and so I finished that one, Amelia and Me, and then the second book is, and of course now I don't have it in front of me, but it's the second one in the series, which I will have it in the show notes because now I can't friggin' remember what it is. But anyway, so sorry about that, everybody. But here's the thing. This is fabulous juvenile historical
Nice.
fiction. I mean, I even told Jen, I said, I'm not just saying this because this is your mother in law. Like, I love this book. It reminds me why I love juvenile historical fiction because I learned something. It makes me want to know more about a subject. And so basically, the story is about Ginny Ross, who lives in Newfoundland and just becomes enamored of Amelia Earhart. So it's set in the first book is set in 1932, 31 to 32 or 32 to 33. I can't remember now. But anyway, here's what's amazing about the book. All of the characters in the book are real people. So Heather's family, all of these people are real. And she shows in the back of the book photographs of all of the people in front of this family store, this little cart that this young man hooked his dog to that they could pull around and everything. And then Ginny, I think is her aunt in real life, she literally gave a thermos of hot soup to Amelia Earhart when she flew from
Cool.
Newfoundland to Paris. So there's a picture of Amelia holding that thermos in the book. So anyway, so basically what she's done is she's created this story of real people, but this connection to Amelia. And Ginny she's 12 going on 13. She wants to be a pilot. She wants to be the next Amelia Earhart. And I mean to tell you, I loved it. It's an engaging story. If anyone out there is listening and you have young readers who I would say are between the ages of, say, 7 to 12, this would be a great book for them. If you have children who love to be read to with a chapter book, whatever age, whether they're under 7 or over 12, again, this would be a fabulous book to read aloud. Short chapters. So if they're going to bed, you can read a quick chapter, couple of chapters. It keeps you hanging on every word just because it's like, okay, I'm just going to say it. And I don't mean this in a respectful or disrespectful way. I'm not even sure how to put it, but it reminds me of Anne of Green Gables. Like you're
Mm,
reading it and it just has this vibe to it that just feels so magical of that time period. And I don't know. But one of the things I do want to mention, and I think what I loved more than anything is when I was a kid and read books, usually the people who went out and had adventures were boys, right? So the boys were able to just go off and, Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, they just went off and did their thing. And you didn't really get to read about girl characters who did it. But in this first book, Ginny literally takes a train across Newfoundland, takes a ferry across to Nova Scotia, gets a train to Boston to find Amelia, who had written her a letter. And then she's not there. So she has to find her way to New York and she gets robbed in Boston and she has to make her way there with no money. And I was like, when I was a kid, I wanted to read about girl characters who did
hmm
stuff like that. Stuff like that. Yeah. Because there's just something really magical about being a kid, but having this power and this, you know, just adventurous lifestyle that they go out and just anything is possible. Now,
Yeah.
in the real world, would that have been possible? Probably not. But I just loved it for that. I've started book 2, and now she is going to Purdue University to get an engineering degree, Ginny is, and in real life, Amelia Earhart was like a consultant or something trying to get more girls and women into the field of engineering and being a pilot. So she literally was at Purdue University, which I didn't know. But anyway, I love this book so much, and I want anybody who's out there, if you know a teacher, if you have people, young people in your life that you go to your library and they don't have it, request them to purchase these books. All 3 of the titles will be in the show notes. The 3rd book comes out April 16th of this year. I cannot wait to read it, and I want to interview Heather because I just need to hear more about her, how she crafted this amazing story out of her real life family. So
Yeah.
loved it, loved it, loved it.
Amazing. I will then also, I'm going to add on to it that I think this won't be for young readers, but for others who are interested. The recent Helen Humphreys book that I read, Leaving Earth, is a beautiful partnering with that book.
Oh,
Yes, right? Because it's about 2 women in the 30s who
that's right.
do the flight trip, and there's
That's right.
actually a young girl who's on the ground who is enamored of the one who's the most famous, who watches them throughout the, trip, like, can watch them circle around. So, you gotta add that. You must read it. Yes.
Okay, so I think that's a great idea for a podcast one day. We should do like you do an adult title, I'll do a comparable kids title, and then you could kind of people could get kind of both sides of something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds fun.
That's a brilliant pairing. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to add that again to the show notes. Yeah, thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right. What do you have next?
Okay, my 3rd choice is a cheat. I cheated. I cheated big time.
You cheat a lot. Well, not a lot, but you have cheated in the past, but yes.
I'm totally cheating because I'm like, oh, I can't pick something. So I chose the remaining of the Canada Reads shortlist is what I read. So I read
Oh,
the
yeah.
last 3 books, and one of them you will hear my thoughts on in the next episode that's going to air after this one. And the other 2 you've heard, well, one you've heard Rebecca has discussed, so they've been mentioned.
Mhm,
So I just wanted to lump them together. Plus, when we do our Canada Reads, when everything starts, we're going to hear a lot about these books anyway. So I'm not going to
mhm.
spend a lot of time on setting them up. I'm just going to put them as my
Okay.
3rd book that I read the remaining of my Canada Reads shortlist book. And those were Meet Me at the Lake by Carley Fortune, a romance. Denison Avenue by Christina Wong with Daniel Innes, the illustrator. I think that both Rebecca and I agree that this is the book we want to win. Although I'd be happy with the future as well, but those are my 2 choices. And the 3rd book is Shut Up, You're Pretty by Taya Mutonji, which is like a linked collection of short stories about a young girl, 2 young women growing up in Scarborough. So there we go. That's all I'm going to say because I'm going to leave the rest for our Canada Reads discussions and debates. But I'm like, I got to bring. I think I'm just going to bring. Boom, just bring those that I read them.
You don't wanna give a hint of anything on any of those 3? I don't I'm just asking.
Okay,
If you don't have
no,
to.
I don't mind. Okay, so
Okay.
of these 3, so now I've the fourth one is the future. 5th was Bad Cree. So I'm going to go with. I would love to see Denison Avenue win. If not Denison Avenue, then the future. I
Mhm,
also loved Bad Cree. So I would, if Bad Cree ended up winning, like if he can defend it, which I think he can. He seems very charming. When Dallas Soonsey, I believe is his name, heard an interview with him lately, and I think he could do it. Although he is a little self-deprecating, so he's throughout the interview he would say negative things about himself. So I'm like,
uh-oh,
got to
yeah,
like take that under control. But I
yeah.
could see him doing that. So then, Meet Me at the Lake by Carley Fortune, I did read. I finished it because I wanted to know what happened, but I didn't love it. And you listen to the next episode after that, and you'll hear my whole rant about that book.
I even ranted
I
about it, even
know.
though I hadn't read it, and I apologize in advance because I think I ranted as well.
Oh, but I apologize too. I still read it. And I had to read it. I had to find out, but I didn't. I don't think it should be on the short list. There, I said it. I don't think it should be
Mhm.
on the short list. And Shut Up, You're Pretty, the short story collection, just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So I've heard other takes on it, which and I can see, and I was like, oh, like, I'm like, okay, and I'm looking forward to hearing it defend it because I want to not what I missed, but I just wanted to get someone else's take on it, and I want to hear it defend it. But it wasn't a book for me.
I think it's funny because I'm reading more people saying that it's not a book for them either, that
Okay.
they didn't really enjoy it. So it's interesting because again, I can't really remember it and I can't get a copy of it, but in time. But again, I gave it 4 stars. I think I generally liked it, but I'm hearing more people saying they didn't care for it
Mm,
as opposed to
interesting.
they did. So I agree with you. I can't wait to see it
Yeah.
defended, and I'm hoping that it will trigger some memory of what the book was because I thought they were standalone stories and they're linked.
Hmm.
Main
Yeah.
characters were linked, and I'm like, what the hell, man? I don't know
Yeah.
what I was thinking, but
And again, the defender, I can't remember the defender's name, but I heard an interview with her on CBC with Ali, and I think she's
mhm.
going to be a strong defender.
Oh,
So
good.
I'm really excited to see what she does and says with this book. But,
Yeah,
you know,
cannot
yeah,
wait. I'm very excited,
I
so
kind of like having books that I didn't like be in the short list, actually, as opposed to like liking them all.
yeah, that's true because it does give you a little more just something I mean, I think it's easy to just sit back and go, "Oh, I loved them all," you know?
Yeah.
It's always, "Oh,
Yeah.
I loved them all," and then you're just kinda torn, but I think it's kinda cool to have sometimes that's how I felt I don't know if it was 2 years ago or something during the pandemic year, there were a couple that I was just like, "Ugh," just wasn't feeling it at
Yeah.
all and everything, so, yeah, I do think it's okay to
Yeah.
have a year like that every once in a while, so
Exactly. Okay. So what's your next book?
I can't think of another book that has made me think about it this long and in the ways that I've been thinking about it than Birdsuit by Sydney Hegele. And I think in the podcast that'll follow this one, I pronounced their name incorrectly, so it is Hegele. And this was a book that came to us through a publicist, and I said, "Sure, this sounds really fascinating." And I okay, it's coming highly recommended, and so now I do want you at some point. I feel like you need to read this book because
Yeah,
I do
I
think
will.
it's
Yeah.
fascinating. I'm gonna actually read my review of it. Otherwise, I'm gonna just you know garble it up because it is kind of a weirdly complicated sort of backstory a little bit. So here's my what I wrote. Every summer, tourists flood tiny Port Peter for the luscious peaches, crowded boardwalk, and Lake Legaya's dark green water. 9 months after the season ends, the local girls with limited options give birth and then head up to the cliffside and leave their babies in a white plastic laundry basket, knowing that the bird women who live in the depths of the lake will raise them. Georgia, who is our main character, was rejected at birth by the bird women and is thus retrieved and raised by her mother, Elsie, who is the town's taxidermist. Despite there being few economic or educational opportunities in Port Peter, Georgia seems stuck in limbo until her mother's former roommate, Reverend Arlo Bloom, moves into the local vicarage with his wife Felicity and son Isaiah. That's the very beginning of the book. And Georgia is this really compelling character because she is a young woman who is really hard on herself and she makes a lot of mistakes. She blames herself for a lot of things that are not her fault, but then she meets this what I would say monster, Arlo Bloom, this reverend,
Mm,
and everything that happens as a result of that meeting and that relationship powers the rest of the story. So, Here are some of the themes that I wanted to just touch base on. So first of all, this is the mythology piece, right? So birdsuit, I looked up birdsuit because I didn't know what birdsuit was. So basically, you know, the sirens that used to call, they would sit out like on a rock or something and they would call the sailors to their death. They would be very
Hmm.
seductive and they would call them out. I guess I guess what they wore or something. It was like a birdsuit because they were part woman, part bird. So they would call these men out. And there's also the idea too that they could be, I guess, like mermaids or something, but that the bird suit thing is it's really bird women. And so in the story, she flips that mythology. So I love that. And that's all I'm going to say. She sort of flips
Okay.
that mythology. Okay. That's number one. That's one of the things I wanted to say. The fact that there is an Anglican priest and he's the head of a church and there's all these things that are going on. Sydney is very, I read a lot about them, and they are a faithful person. They go to church. Today was, or the other day was Ash Wednesday, and they had an ash on their forehead. So they are somebody who has a faith background, but you can tell maybe perhaps she has some issues there. So there's that compelling aspect of the story. It has so many layers to it that I reread the book and I just kept, which I don't normally do, but I kept thinking like, I need to connect these dots and how are these dots? And then as I started to connect them, here's what I came away with. Like the whole point of these peaches, it represents female sexuality, fruitfulness, giving birth, you know, that whole thing. So there's that real iconic image of this community that just is inundated with peaches and female sexuality, and there's a queer love story in it. I mean, there's just so many layers that I just couldn't stop thinking about how it all connected. And I can't remember a book I've read that made me do that. You know what I'm saying? That
Hmm.
I actually
Hmm.
went back and reread it because
Yeah.
I just kept thinking, wait a minute. Because I'd think to myself, wait a minute, how did this happen with this character? And then I would start to go back and go, oh my God, I completely missed this. So I think that Sydney is a brilliant author, and that they wrote The Pump, which had won awards and everything. Did you ever read The Pump, by the
No.
way? Yeah, I remember when it came out, it just sounded a little odd for me,
Hmm.
but I think now that I've read this one, I want to go back and read The Pump because I think Sydney Hegele is an author that has a unique point of view
Yeah.
and just has a lot to say in a really seems simple but very complex way to get her message out. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm loving it because I love the name. Like I love the alliteration. Port Peter, Peaches, Georgia Peach. She's a Georgia Peach. I mean, that's Bloom, Arlo Bloom. Like the names are fantastic.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's why I say the story is, you could read it as part mythology and part magic realism, part realistic, because there's well, I don't want to say that because I don't want to give that away. But there are so many things about life and death and shame and faith that I want someone else to read it, and then I need to talk about it because
Hmm.
that's how much I love this book.
I'm reading.
And my goal is I would love to reach out to Sydney and see if we can't get them to chat with us.
Yeah.
So after you've read it, I would love to see if we could reach out to them and see if they would
Yeah.
join us.
It's on my list. I'm going to hunt for it.
It comes out May 7th. So if you haven't had a chance to get it on your TBR, I really highly recommend it. And I would love to know what you think.
I'm looking forward to that one. Even like anyways, yeah, I haven't even read the book and I'm like deep diving into the names.
Yeah. I know. I started looking up their names. Like I looked up Arlo, and you know, Arlo is not a biblical name. And then of course, Arlo's wife is Felicity, and of course that has a
Mm,
meaning. And then their son Isaiah. So I looked up what Isaiah meant in the Bible. So that's why I say there's just all these little like gems that you can, these hidden gems, and maybe not so hidden. Maybe everybody else will read it and be like, what the heck? Of course I understood all this. But I just was reading it for the story. And then I would
yeah.
be like, oh my God, like this is
Yeah.
how it's connected. And again, what I love is it does go back and show people when they were younger. And yeah, so
Yeah.
I love Georgia. I love the story. I love Sydney. And I want to just say, please read Birdsuit and let me know what you think.
Sounds amazing. So good. I think that's it. I think we've come to the end of another book chat. Let us know what you've been reading, and happy reading.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.